So it's been one of those weeks. You lose track of the news for 10 minutes, and Donald Trump has done something outrageous or unbelievable or remarkable or something unbelievably, remarkably outrageous. We'll talk tonight about his intensifying quest for a Nobel Peace Prize and whether he can bang heads together in Europe the way he just did in the Middle East. And we'll talk about his administration's accelerating campaign at home to excoriate, indict, and or marginalize the president's many enemies, real and imagined. The Justice Department is no longer an autonomous agency, but a weapon in Trump's arsenal. And the Department of Defense, we won't be calling it the Department of War until Congress actually makes that change, has driven the free press out of the Pentagon. Joining me tonight to discuss all this and more, Ann Applebaum, a staff writer at The Atlantic. Stephen Hayes is the editor of The Dispatch. Tyler Pager is a White House correspondent at The New York Times. And Nancy Youssef remains a Pentagon correspondent at The Atlantic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for being here. I know you're not at the Pentagon, but you're still covering the Defense Department
That's right.
rigorously, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But, Ann, I want to start with you. President Zelensky back in the White House. Not a great meeting from his perspective, not a disaster like an earlier meeting. But it seems as if we're on this roller coaster with President Trump. First, he was on Putin's side. Then Putin alienated him, and he announced a little while back, maybe Ukraine can take all of its territory back. Now he's back in this mode. He just put this on Truth Social a little while ago. The meeting with President Zelensky was very interesting and cordial, but I told him, as I likewise strongly suggested to President Putin, that it is time to stop the killing and make a deal. Enough blood has been shed with property lines being defined by war and guts. And then he goes on for a while. Now, obviously, if you're President Zelensky and you hear him say that it is time to stop the killing, in Zelensky's mind, he's saying yes, and the guy who started the killing probably should stop. Give us a sense, from your perspective, of where we are in this drama. Is he getting frustrated or just tired of thinking about Ukraine?
So let me step back a second and let's remember what it would really take to end this war. How would you really end it? None of the drama or imaginary solutions. So what it takes to end the war is to persuade the Russians, President Putin, the Moscow elite, whoever, that it's not worth fighting anymore and that they need to stop. They need to bring their troops home and they need to make a deal. They're the ones who have to be persuaded. And unfortunately, almost everything that President Trump has done since taking office has pushed them in the opposite direction, has encouraged them to keep fighting. So by attacking Zelensky back in February, by saying, we'll give them Tomahawks, we won't give them Tomahawks, by messing around with sanctions, we'll do sanctions, we won't do sanctions. All of these things are encouraging President Putin to say, right, I can break up the coalition that helps Ukraine. I can separate America from Europe. I can hold out longer than these Americans who can't make up their mind what they want, and I can win. And Putin has never said he wants a ceasefire. He has never recognized the legitimacy of Zelensky. He has never said that Ukraine can survive as an independent sovereign state. So until he gives up those things, the war will continue. And so what we're doing now is encouraging him to believe that he can fight. And that's why I think there's a level of disaster here that's not immediately obvious from the optics.
Steve, put this in the context of what he just did in the Middle East, because he did bring the situation to a ceasefire and did force the release of the Israeli hostages. Partially, he did that by bullying, to some degree, Netanyahu, his friend and ally, partially by threatening Hamas. Are there lessons in that for Ukraine and Russia, or is Ukraine and Russia a whole other level of difficulty?
Yeah, I think it's a whole other level of difficulty, and there, as an alliance, an actual alliance between the U.S. and Israel, that there really isn't between the U.S. and Russia right now, even though Donald Trump wants to be on friendly terms with Vladimir Putin. But I think Ann is right. I mean, if you go back and you look at things that Donald Trump has said, these moments where he's feigned toughness toward Vladimir Putin rhetorically, you know, you have 50 days. There has to be a ceasefire within 50 days. Then he shifted it to 10 to 12 days. Then he threatened very severe consequences shortly before Alaska if they didn't stop the fighting. And at virtually every one of those moments, Vladimir Putin not only disregarded what the president was saying, he stepped up kinetic action in Ukraine, as if to say, I'm not listening to you. What you say to me doesn't matter. And, you know, there was a time when if you talk to people in sort of Trump world or Trump national security world, they would say they thought there was a chance that Donald Trump would be humiliated by this, embarrassed by this, that Putin was so clearly not taking him seriously, and perhaps actually change his posture. But it seems, and I think today's meeting suggests that that is not, in fact, the case. He had a warm call, by all accounts, with Putin yesterday, or a friendly call. And coming out of this meeting with Zelensky today, despite Zelensky's obsequiousness and flattery in their joint discussion in front of reporters, doesn't sound like the meeting went very well.
One of the reporters he had that moment of flattery was Tyler. You were there. Zelensky seems to have learned that flattery works better than honesty. I don't know. You tell us.
Yeah, I mean, there is a clear difference in the way that Zelensky is presenting himself in front of Trump than when he did the first time in the Oval Office, and he was basically dismissed, and the
J.D. Vance went after him.
Yeah, and the relationship just sort of blew up from there. I mean, he is disappointed that he did not get the Tomahawks, and I think there was some whiplash there because it seemed prior to...
Explain that just a little
bit. Yeah,
bit.
prior to President Trump's call with Putin yesterday, there was an expectation that the U.S. was going to give Ukraine Tomahawks, which it has desperately wanted, to fire these long-range missiles into deeper targets in Russia. Then President Trump has a call with Putin. It's unclear exactly what was said on that call, but clearly he persuaded him to a certain degree to not give Zelensky the Tomahawks, and Zelensky's leaving Washington without the Tomahawks. Right. But we did not see that. Zelensky was measured and composed outside the White House after the meeting. You know, he reiterated that he similarly, like the president said in this True Social you just read, he wants to end the war. And, you know, he was very delicate and careful in his word choice because he knows that he needs to continue to remain on good terms with Trump if he wants any sort of leverage or progress in this.
Nancy, as a Pentagon correspondent, explain the importance of the Tomahawks. That seems to be the acid test here. If you give the Ukraine the Tomahawks, they can do some serious damage. But talk about that a little bit in the context of the situation on the ground.
So the Tomahawks are cruise missiles that launch up to over 1,000 miles, and they are harder to detect. So what they would give the Ukrainians is precision and distance. You can launch them from ships, submarines, and more recently from land. And so the idea tactically would be if they had Tomahawk missiles, they could do things like hit Moscow, hit air bases from which drones and some of these attack planes are flying over Ukraine, and also hit some of the military depots that are and factories that are producing the weapons that are posing a threat to Ukraine. Having said that, I think they also pose they are there as a form of leverage. So we think there's what they offer to the potential battlefield, but also what they offer politically. And I think as we think about the use of Tomahawks, we should think of them as the way that the president is trying to put pressure on Putin to potentially enter talks in Budapest down the road. So there's a military value to them, but there's also a political one.
Right, and the Tomahawks would be actual proof that Trump wants Ukraine to win?
They could be. I mean, I don't think at this point in the war there's any single weapon that would be a real game changer. I mean, in fact, the weapons or the weapon system that's made the biggest difference in the war are the ones that have been built by the Ukrainians themselves. So they have completely reinvented
their homemade drone situation.
And homemade drones, if it sounds like they're making one with glue and tape, as we saw at the beginning of the war, this is not the case anymore. These are very, very sophisticated factories. I was there a month ago and saw some of them.
A couple of years ago, Ann and I were in Ukraine, and they were literally doing this in garages.
This is now not like that at all anymore. These are sophisticated. The drones are the size of this table or bigger. They're large little airplanes. They can fly for 7 hours. They carry warheads. They've taken out 20% of the Russian refinery industry already. And so it's not so much what's important about the Tomahawks isn't the weapon and what it can do. I mean, I'm sure they'd be delighted to have them. What's important is the symbolism, the fact that the U.S. is giving a sophisticated weapon to Ukraine, and that would, as I said, that would help bring about the end of the war because it would convince the Russians that actually Ukraine's allies are going to stick with it and actually Ukraine has a lot of staying power.
Right. The president is very confident right now. I want you to listen to what he said on Thursday.
That's all I've done in my whole life. I've made deals. I know about deals. I do it well. I don't think any president's ever ended a war, frankly. One war, I did 8 of them.
So I want to show the viewers at home and you a partial list of wars ended by other presidents. This is a very partial list. You're familiar with many of these. Includes, I would throw in the American Revolution as a war ended by George Washington successfully. As you look at that list, Steve, you've studied President Trump for years. Does he believe this, or is this part of his, I will bend reality in order to get the Nobel Peace Prize? Does he believe that he's the only president to ever stop a war?
So I think he convinces himself that he's the only president. But he's not. He doesn't stop and think, wow, wait, is this true? If it's not true, I ought not say it. I don't think he's ever done that. So he says these things. And in the same breath, and he did this again with Zelensky today, he claimed, what is the war count that he's ended now? 8? I think he says 8. Now we're approaching 9.
And sometimes he forgets which countries he's mediated.
Which he's claiming, right. Today he said he saved millions and millions of lives. He's ended 8 wars. No, I think...
Is this advertising for the Nobel Committee?
Well, undoubtedly. I think it's very clear that he's obsessed with winning the Nobel. Everybody who talks to him, everybody who knows him.
Absolutely. Just to add on to that, part of the reason he's obsessed is because Obama won the prize. And he does not feel Obama deserved the prize, and he thinks he deserved the prize. This has been something he's been obsessed with dating back to his first term.
Right.
Yeah, I think you might be right about Obama, if I can editorialize a little bit. But no,
Obama got it before he did anything.
Right, exactly.
That was a gift from the Norwegians.
They've effectively said, yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
But what he's trying to do here, I do think, is bend reality. And he's seen this work for him again and again and again. You have more than half of the Republican Party sort of shrugs off what happened on January 6th or thinks that it was Antifa or thinks that it was the FBI or what have you. He does this, and it works.
Nancy, I want to ask you, in the category of appropriate credit, following the Middle East situation carefully, he did do the thing in Gaza. It's not peace, it's ceasefire. It's very hard to make peace with, for Israel to make peace with Hamas because Hamas doesn't believe that Israel should exist. It's hard to negotiate your own existence, obviously. But he did achieve something there. He banged Netanyahu's head together with dealing with Qatar and pushed and threatened Hamas. Do you give credit for this or any other?
It's hard to not give credit given the return of the hostages after 2 years. And I think if you watch those images this week, it was really moving, as well as the return of Palestinian prisoners. However, that was phase 1, and phase 2, 3, 4, 5 are the more complicated in terms of reaching an enduring peace in that region. We still haven't answered the question of what disarming Hamas looks like, who's governing there. And the proof of, I think, how much Hamas is entrenched and still has power is within a day of this. They were executing opposition in Gaza City, Palestinians.
Other Palestinians.
That's right. And so that is not a group that seems to be on its back heels.
And he shrugged that off.
Yes, because
which was very odd.
But until those enduring questions are answered, which in some ways are much more complicated than the initial one, I think it's hard to say that we're on the path to an enduring peace.
Right, and another example would be he claims to have brought peace to Pakistan and India. I don't think anybody at this table would bet that Pakistan and India are never going to have another armed confrontation again.
No, and actually, I've been really bothered by the coverage of the Middle East story because whatever credit he deserves for putting pressure on Netanyahu, the coverage has been so ecstatic, almost sort of echoing his own rhetoric. It's as if we're influenced by his high opinion of what he's done. And exactly the point that Nancy just made, we haven't talked about who's going to govern Gaza. We haven't talked about what the broader region looks like. I mean, all these unanswered questions that normally they would be that would be the main thing we were discussing, and somehow, as you know, Trump bends the story and he twists it, and here we are talking about the Nobel Prize as if that was what was important, not peace in Gaza.
It's really interesting you say that, because my colleague and I did a story about Jared Kushner, and in the conversation my colleague Katie Rogers had with him, he said, we're deals guys, and our job is to get to yes first and figure out the details later. And in fact, that's sort of what happened. He got the hostages out. They got the yes to the release of the hostages, but the details remain exceedingly unclear, and that's the important stuff. That's the hard stuff. That's how you get to some sort of lasting peace, if that's possible.
And the Biden administration got hostages released. It's not like there have been no hostages released in this war.
Right.